Do you ever wonder what Christmas tasted like when your grandparents cooked from memory? These African American dishes carried love, faith, and family in every bite. What pieces of that warmth have we let fade away? Smothered turkey wings were the kind of meal that filled a house before you even sat down to eat. The slow-baked wings simmered in their own juices, bathed in a gravy so rich and brown it seemed to hold generations of flavor. In many African American Southern homes, this dish wasn't just food, it was a celebration of resourcefulness, a reminder that even the simplest cuts could taste like royalty. The wings were seasoned with onions, garlic, and a touch of pepper, then baked until the meat nearly fell from the bone. Once smothered in the thick pan gravy, they transformed into something divine, something that could silence an entire table mid-bite. On Christmas, when money might have been tight but spirits were high, this dish symbolized the best of soul food. Slow, loving, made to last. The gravy wasn't just poured, it was ladled like a blessing over rice, mashed potatoes, or soft cornbread. Every forkful carried comfort and patience, as if time itself had seasoned it. Smothered turkey wings were about stretching flavor, turning effort into abundance. The sound of bubbling broth, the smell of onions caramelizing, it was all part of the ritual. In every bite lived a legacy, and in every kitchen, the memory of someone who knew how to make a little go a long way. Sweet potato biscuits brought sunshine to winter mornings. Their orange glow peeked from the oven, warm and soft with a buttery crust that crumbled at the touch. They were made from mashed sweet potatoes, one of the most treasured ingredients in African American kitchens, valued for their sweetness, their earthiness, and their ability to stretch a meal. On Christmas mornings, these biscuits were stacked high beside grits, eggs, or fried apples, brushed with melted butter or drizzled with honey. They smelled like the start of a good day. In times when sugar was scarce, the natural sweetness of the potato did all the work. Kneaded by hand and baked in cast-iron skillets, they carried the weight of care in every fold. Grandmothers taught children how to press the dough without overworking it, whispering small lessons about patience, family, and food as love. These biscuits weren't fancy, but they made every breakfast feel special. They were proof that beauty didn't need perfection, just heart, warmth, and a little time. Every batch was a promise that something good always waited at the table. Sweet potato biscuits didn't just feed families, they connected them. Molasses pound cake was the kind of dessert that lived in memory long after the last crumb was gone. It was heavy in the hand, rich in flavor, and spiced with cinnamon, ginger, and cloves, made for cold evenings when the scent of baking was enough to warm the whole house. Molasses stood in for sugar when sugar was too dear, and it gave the cake its deep brown color and caramel soul. The batter, thick and fragrant, was poured into worn loaf pans that had seen a lifetime of holidays. When it emerged from the oven, the crust glistened, slightly sticky, like honey touched by smoke. African American families passed this recipe through generations, often written in fading ink on the backs of church bulletins or tucked inside cookbooks. It wasn't just dessert, it was preservation. The flavor was bold and comforting, sweet without being showy, a reflection of the people who made it. Served with a glass of milk or a drizzle of cream, it carried history in every bite. Molasses pound cake wasn't about extravagance, it was about memory, about keeping sweetness alive even when times were lean. In that way, it wasn't just cake, it was resilience baked golden. Collard greens with smoked neck bones were the kind of dish that turned time into flavor. They simmered all morning long, filling homes with a deep, steady scent that wrapped itself around every memory. The greens wilted slow, darkening as they soaked up smoke and salt from the bones. It wasn't a quick recipe, it was an act of devotion. The pot lid rattled, the broth thickened, and the kitchen grew warm even when the wind outside bit sharp. In many homes, the first taste wasn't eaten, it was offered in quiet thanks. The broth, called potlikker, was sacred, sopped up with cornbread until not a drop remained. Families added hot sauce, pepper flakes, or a pinch of sugar, but the soul stayed the same. The greens spoke of survival and gratitude, of making beauty from what the world discarded. Every spoonful carried stories older than the table it sat on. Forgotten by fast meals and new diets, it remains one of the truest expressions of home. When the pot boiled low and the air grew heavy with comfort, you knew Christmas had finally arrived. Candied yams with burnt sugar crust could make a whole house stop talking. Thick slices of yam bathed in butter and brown sugar until the edges bubbled and caramelized into dark glass. The smell alone was enough to draw everyone to the kitchen door. It was a dish that glowed like amber, glistening beneath oven light. Each bite balanced soft sweetness with smoky depth, melting into the tongue like memory. Families made it with precision, layering yams just right so the syrup reached every corner. Some added nutmeg or orange zest, others just let the sugar speak. It was often the first dish to disappear, scraped clean before dessert was served. No holiday table felt right without it. Candied yams weren't just sweet, they were sacred, connecting generations through the simplest acts of care. When the crust cracked beneath a spoon, it was music, the sound of warmth returning home. Baked macaroni pie was where comfort met celebration. Unlike its modern boxed cousin, this dish was rich, homemade, and soulful. Layers of tender pasta held together by eggs, milk, and sharp cheddar cheese. African-American families treated it as more than a side. It was a centerpiece of holiday tables. The top baked to a perfect crust, golden and bubbling, while the inside stayed creamy and soft. Every bite carried the flavor of home, of effort, and pride. Long before convenience foods arrived, this was what macaroni and cheese meant, a dish born from community cookbooks, perfected in cast-iron pans. Children waited eagerly for the first cut, watching the steam rise as it hit the cool December air. The smell filled the room, mingling with baked ham, greens, and sweet yams, forming the true symphony of Christmas dinner. Baked macaroni pie was more than sustenance. It was identity. It told a story of creativity born from scarcity, of making something extraordinary from what you had. That first creamy, cheesy forkful said everything about love that words couldn't. Homemade yeast rolls were simple perfection. They rose patiently on countertops covered in dish towels, their dough soft as clouds and fragrant with yeast. When they came out of the oven, golden brown and brushed with butter, they melted in your mouth. No Christmas table was complete without them. They were served in baskets lined with linen, passed around with smiles and "save one for me, please." Each roll represented time, hours of kneading, rising, and baking, and yet they disappeared in minutes. The recipe was often unwritten, taught by touch. The dough must feel alive, springing back beneath your fingers. Families measured not with cups, but with instinct, and somehow it always worked. Paired with ham or gravy, they soaked up every bit of goodness from the plate. Their scent alone could bring people to the table before grace was even said. Homemade yeast rolls were the soul of hospitality, a soft reminder that even the simplest foods could bring a family together. Sweet potato pie with brown sugar meringue crowned holiday tables with a beauty that matched its flavor. Smooth, mashed sweet potatoes blended with warm spices created a filling as rich as any custard, poured into a flaky handmade crust. The crowning touch was a cloud of meringue whipped with brown sugar until caramel-scented peaks formed and browned lightly in the oven. Families saved the first slice for honored guests or elders, a sign of respect and affection. The pie carried the sweetness of the southern soil and the skill of generations who knew how to stretch simple ingredients into celebration. Children licked the mixing bowls clean while parents watched the meringue rise, a shared moment of anticipation before the feast. Over time, commercial pies and instant mixes dulled the tradition, but those who remember the warm aroma of brown sugar meringue know that this dessert is more than food. It is a memory of family love, patient hands, and the quiet pride of homemade beauty. Baked chicken drumsticks with barbecue sauce were a Sunday treat even if it was Tuesday. Cheap family packs meant you could feed everyone without breaking your wallet. You would season the chicken with salt, pepper, and maybe a little sugar if you wanted that glaze to stick. Then it went into the oven until the smell wrapped around the house. The sauce would bubble and darken, thick like molasses, dripping down to the pan. Every piece came out sticky, sweet, and smoky, just right. You could eat it with white bread or plain rice, and it felt like more than enough. No one cared that it was not fancy. It was full of flavor and made with love. You licked your fingers clean and went back for seconds even when you said you were full. That was what made it special. It was proof that food did not need a big budget to feel like a celebration. Just heat, sauce, and time. Oyster dressing was the coastal South's gift to the Christmas table. Cornbread crumbs mingled with chopped oysters, onions, celery, and sage, baked until the top turned golden and crisp. It was rich, briny, and savory, a dish that tasted of sea air and soil all at once. For African American families living near the coast, this was holiday tradition, passed down from ancestors who combined African, Native, and European influences into something uniquely their own. The oysters gave it depth, the cornbread warmth, and together they created something almost sacred. The smell of butter and herbs filled the kitchen long before dinner began. It wasn't just food, it was geography, history, and memory on one plate. Served beside turkey or ham, it brought balance and luxury, even when times were lean. Each forkful told a story of community and creativity, of people who turned their surroundings into sustenance. Oyster dressing was the ocean's whisper at a winter feast, a taste of home for all who grew up near the tide. Red velvet cake with cooked frosting was a labor of love before boxed mixes made it easy. Back then, the red came not from dye but from beets, earthy and rich, giving the cake its signature hue. The batter was velvety, the texture soft enough to melt between bites. The frosting, cooked on the stove, turned creamy and smooth with a custard base that cooled like silk. It was a showpiece at Christmas, carried proudly to church socials or laid at the center of the table. Families baked it days ahead, wrapping layers in wax paper so the flavor deepened with time. Every slice glowed crimson against white icing, a vision of pride and patience. The first bite always drew a smile, sweet but subtle, like the memory of a song half remembered. Few make it that way now, but those who do know it's not just cake. It's history in sugar and flour, a recipe that carried both love and legacy. Rice and pinto bean casserole was the kind of dinner that turned thrift into tradition. You began with the most dependable foods you had: dry rice, canned beans, and a little oil to bring it together. Onions and garlic gave it soul, sizzling in the pot before everything met in a slow simmer. The smell filled the house, smoky and warm, whispering that dinner was almost ready. It cooked thick and steady, each grain swelling with flavor until it turned rich and creamy. Families gathered close, bowls waiting, knowing there would be enough for everyone. Sometimes a splash of hot sauce or a sprinkle of cornbread crumbs made it feel new, but it never needed more than what you already had. It was filling, kind food, the sort that did not brag but stayed with you. It stretched a few ingredients into something that felt abundant. You could serve it hot one night and warm it again the next morning, still perfect. The pot scraped clean every time, no matter the week or weather. It was humble food that carried its own quiet pride. In homes where money was thin but care was plenty, rice and pinto bean casserole was both a meal and a memory. Pineapple upside-down cake was pure Sunday sunshine baked in a skillet. Mama would melt butter and brown sugar first, letting it bubble just enough to coat the bottom before laying perfect golden rings of pineapple in place. A bright red cherry sat in the center of each ring, like jewels in a crown. The batter poured on top was thick and sweet, sealing the fruit in a sugary glaze that caramelized as it baked. When it flipped out of the pan, everyone held their breath until it landed, glistening, golden, and smelling like heaven. The cake was soft and airy, the fruit sticky and rich, a dance of sweet and tart that no one could resist. Served warm with a dollop of cream, it was the definition of show-stopping simplicity. You could taste the pride in every bite, proof that beauty could rise out of everyday things. Pineapple upside-down cake was more than dessert. It was an event. Families made it to celebrate, to impress, or simply to make Sunday feel extra sweet. The first slice always drew applause, the last one quiet sighs. It was the kind of dessert that made an ordinary meal feel like a moment worth remembering. Baked ham with clove and pineapple rings glittered like celebration itself. It was the proud centerpiece of countless 1970s Christmas tables, shimmering under layers of brown sugar glaze. The ham was studded with whole cloves and crowned with golden rings of pineapple fastened by cherries in the center. Every glaze sizzled under the oven's heat, caramelizing into a sweet, smoky crust that filled the air with comfort. Families sliced it thin for sandwiches the next day or thick for dinner beside greens and macaroni. It wasn't just food. It was performance, love, and pride baked into one dish. Mothers polished Pyrex trays and fathers carved with ceremony, serving slices that glistened like amber. The sweet fruit and salty meat made every bite feel both familiar and fancy. Though store-bought spiral hams have taken its place, none can replace the memory of that golden roast shining in the candlelight. It was more than a meal. It was a symbol of making the most of what you had and turning it into joy. Old-fashioned tea cakes tasted like quiet afternoons and childhood visits to Grandma's house, their soft sugar cookie texture carrying a gentle vanilla fragrance. Butter, sugar, and fresh eggs were beaten together until light, then mixed with flour and a hint of nutmeg to create a dough that chilled before baking. Rolled and cut into simple rounds, the cakes puffed slightly as they baked, filling the kitchen with a sweet, buttery aroma. Neither overly sweet nor bland, they struck a perfect balance that invited dunking in tea or milk. Families treasured these cookies for their simplicity and the way they invited conversation, often baking them in large batches to share with neighbors. In the 1970s, tea cakes were a quiet staple of African American hospitality, a link to centuries of tradition. Each soft bite carried the comfort of home and the memory of loving hands, reminding everyone that sometimes the most unassuming desserts are the ones that linger longest in the heart. Hoppin John wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual. A bowl of black-eyed peas and rice cooked down with pork, it carried the promise of luck and prosperity into the new year. African American families made it at Christmas and again on New Year's Day, believing every pea represented fortune to come. The peas were soaked overnight, simmered slow and flavored with fatback or ham hock until the broth turned smoky and rich. The aroma filled kitchens from Georgia to Louisiana, blending the earthiness of rice with the depth of pork and a touch of spice. It wasn't an expensive dish, but it was abundant, stretching small portions into a feast that could feed a crowd. Children were told to eat at least one spoonful for good luck, though few stopped at just one. Served alongside greens and cornbread, it became a complete meal and a yearly prayer. Each bite was a bridge between struggle and hope, between survival and joy. Hoppin John reminded every family that wealth came in many forms, flavor, family, and faith among them. It was food with purpose, born from ingenuity and belief, simmered in the same pot as endurance and love. Chitlins, or chitterlings as some called them, were not for the faint of heart, but for those who knew they were a delicacy of pride. Cleaned thoroughly and simmered for hours, these pork intestines were transformed from scraps into something sacred. During Christmas and New Year gatherings, chitlins were a celebration of resilience. The smell was strong, the process demanding, but the reward was in the tenderness and taste that came after patience. Families seasoned them with vinegar, onion, and pepper, and served them with a splash of hot sauce for a fiery finish. Cooking chitlins was more than tradition. It was a rite of endurance, a communal act that brought laughter, storytelling, and music into the kitchen. No one ate them in silence. They were meant to be shared. They carried the memory of times when nothing was wasted, when resourcefulness defined survival. A dish born from hardship had become one of defiant joy, proof that even what others discarded could be made beautiful. Chitlins weren't just food, they were history simmered tender. Chitlin scramble was one of those breakfasts that spoke directly to resourcefulness and resilience. Chitlins, or pig intestines, were cleaned thoroughly, boiled until tender, and then chopped into small pieces. They were folded into scrambled eggs with onions, creating a dish that was both filling and flavorful. The onions added sweetness, the eggs brought balance, and the chitlins gave a richness that turned the plate into something hearty. Though chitlins are often remembered as a holiday food today, many families once ate them regularly because they were inexpensive and ensured that no part of the hog was wasted. For farm workers and laborers, a plate of chitlin scramble gave strength before long hours of work. It was not a fancy breakfast, but it was deeply tied to survival and tradition. The aroma filled kitchens, and though strong, it carried memories of both family gatherings and everyday meals. Chitlin scramble represented more than food. It was heritage served hot on the morning table. Sweet potato biscuits once brought warmth to breakfast tables and Sunday dinners alike. Mashed sweet potatoes blended with flour, butter, and a touch of sugar created a dough that baked into soft, slightly sweet rounds. These biscuits paired beautifully with salty country ham or a drizzle of sorghum syrup, offering a perfect balance of savory and sweet. Families often baked them in batches large enough to feed relatives and neighbors, turning an ordinary morning into a quiet feast. The natural sweetness of the potatoes gave the biscuits a gentle orange hue, a visual comfort as well as a culinary one. Children were often given the task of mashing the cooked potatoes, a small role that made them proud participants in a beloved family recipe. Today, store-bought rolls and instant mixes have replaced the slow, careful preparation of true sweet potato biscuits. For those who remember their fragrance filling the kitchen, each bite carries memories of kinship, generosity, and a heritage that deserves to be cherished. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and onion were a dish that stretched garden vegetables into something filling and satisfying. Bell peppers were inexpensive when in season, and my grandmother made the most of them by stuffing each with seasoned rice, onions, and sometimes a bit of tomato. Meat was optional and often absent, but the rice itself carried enough substance to make the meal complete. The peppers were baked until tender, their skins blistering slightly while the rice absorbed every bit of flavor. Each stuffed pepper became its own little meal, portioned perfectly for children and adults alike. The aroma of roasted peppers and onions filled the house, signaling comfort even when budgets were stretched thin. It was a dish that looked impressive despite being made from humble ingredients, and it reminded families that presentation mattered too. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and onion carried both thrift and pride, proving that even in hard times, dinner could be hearty, healthy, and beautiful on the table. Wild berry dumplings were a breakfast that came directly from the land. Foraged berries like blackberries, blueberries, or mulberries were gathered in the early morning, often by children who knew where the best patches grew. The berries were simmered into a sweet syrup, and then simple dumplings made from flour and water were dropped into the pot. As they cooked, the dumplings soaked up the berry flavor, becoming plump, soft, and comforting. This was not a dish you would find in restaurants, but one that carried the taste of summer mornings in rural communities. It was affordable, relying only on what nature provided and a handful of pantry staples. Families looked forward to it during berry season, enjoying a breakfast that blended sweetness and tradition. The dumplings were eaten straight from bowls, sometimes with a little milk poured over the top to stretch the meal further. Wild berry dumplings were proof that even foraged food could feel like a feast. Stewed oxtails with rice gravy brought deep flavor and slow-cooked richness to Sunday tables across many African American communities. Oxtails, once inexpensive and overlooked, were browned in heavy pots and then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and spices until the meat turned buttery soft. The braising liquid thickened into a silky gravy that clung to each grain of rice, creating a dish that was equal parts comfort and celebration. Families saved this meal for weekends when everyone could gather because patience was essential and conversation flowed while the pot worked its magic. Children sneaked tastes from wooden spoons, drawn by the savory aroma that filled the house from morning until evening. The humble tale, once discarded by butchers, became a centerpiece of pride and ingenuity. Today, rising prices and faster cooking habits mean fewer people take the time to coax such tenderness from a simple cut of beef, but those who remember the meal speak of it as a perfect union of thrift, skill, and the slow rhythm of family life. black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Chicken wing stew was one of those meals that would surprise modern ears, since wings were once the cheapest part of the bird. My grandmother bought them in bulk when she could, piling them into pots with onions, celery, and carrots. Slowly simmered, the wings gave up their fat and flavor, turning thin broth into rich gravy. She thickened it with flour or cornstarch, serving it hot over rice or bread to stretch it even further. It was messy eating, but no one complained because the taste was so comforting. Wings may be prized today, but in the 1960s they were scraps, turned into nourishment by clever hands. She said every part of the bird had value if you treated it with respect. Chicken wing stew carried the spirit of thrift, transforming what others dismissed into something that filled the house with warmth. It was proof that good cooking did not depend on wealth, only patience and care. Sorrel hibiscus tea brought a ruby glow to church socials and summer porch gatherings. Its tart floral flavor, steeped from dried hibiscus petals and sweetened with cane sugar, reflected Caribbean influences that African American families carried north and west during migrations. Grandmothers brewed the tea in large enamel pots, sometimes adding a hint of ginger or a squeeze of lime to brighten the taste. Children watched the deep red liquid swirl into pitchers, knowing it signaled a special occasion. Served chilled over cracked ice in simple glasses, sorrel tea cooled guests during humid evenings while hymns and laughter filled the air. The drink offered more than refreshment. It was a quiet connection to ancestors and homelands across the sea. Over time, soda and store-bought beverages replaced the careful steeping of petals and spices, and the vibrant tradition faded in many communities. Those who still make it treasure the deep, crimson reminder of resilience and shared history that once colored every celebration. Old-fashioned jelly roll was dessert-turned performance, a swirl of care baked into every slice. The sponge cake had to be thin, soft, and baked just long enough to hold without cracking. Mama spread a layer of fruit preserves, strawberry, peach, or sometimes homemade blackberry, then rolled it tight while still warm. A dusting of powdered sugar finished it off, white as a light snowfall. When sliced, each round showed perfect spirals of color and cake, the kind that made guests lean closer just to admire the work. It looked delicate, but it was made strong, like the women who baked it. Jelly roll was the dessert that proved patience and precision could live side by side with joy. Every bite was soft and sweet, the tartness of fruit cutting through the sugar just enough. Children waited for the ends, where the filling overflowed and the shape loosened. The rest was served proudly, a centerpiece born from steady hands and time well spent. It was dessert as tradition, meant to be admired before eaten. A jelly roll said, "We may not have much, but what we do have we make beautiful." And it always was, humble, pretty, and filled with love. Sweet potato bread pudding was dessert redemption. Made from stale bread, leftover pie filling, and whatever milk or cream was on hand, it turned scraps into something divine. The mixture baked slowly until golden and fragrant, the edges crisp and the center custardy. Spices like cinnamon and nutmeg gave it warmth, while bits of butter melted into sweetness. No bite was the same. Some chewy, some soft, all rich with flavor. It was the kind of dessert that reminded everyone that waste was not an option, not when creativity could make magic. African-American cooks perfected it out of necessity, transforming leftovers into comfort worth remembering. Served warm with syrup or a drizzle of cream, it made even the humblest meal feel like a feast. Sweet potato bread pudding was a quiet triumph, resourceful, generous, and absolutely unforgettable. Fig preserves cake carried the taste of generosity, of neighbors sharing jars of sweetness wrapped in kitchen towels. Figs grew heavy in backyards across the South, their syrupy fruit turned into preserves that lasted through the winter. Around Christmas, that jam was folded into a dark spiced cake, rich with cinnamon and nutmeg. Every slice was sticky, fragrant, and full of memory, each bite a tribute to the land and labor that made it possible. Women stirred batter slowly, mixing stories into every turn of the spoon. When baked, the cake came out with a deep caramel glow, the fig preserves melting into ribbons of sweetness. It wasn't fancy, but it was precious, passed down through generations like an heirloom. At holiday gatherings, it sat quietly beside flashier desserts, yet always disappeared first. It was the taste of homegrown abundance, the sweetness that money couldn't buy. Fig preserves cake wasn't just food. It was gratitude baked into being. Family Polaroid. Christmas portraits froze joy in square frames that faded but never disappeared. Matching sweaters, gold tinsel, and big smiles became yearly traditions under the flash's warm glow. Parents positioned everyone just right before pressing the button, waiting for that magical whir as the photo slid out. Children fanned it impatiently, watching the image appear like a secret being revealed. Sometimes the lighting was uneven or someone blinked, but no one cared. It was real. Those instant snapshots were proof that love didn't need polish to last. Later, they were tucked into Bibles, taped on mirrors, or slipped into albums beside handwritten notes. The smell of the developing film mixed with laughter as new memories took shape. Today's digital pictures come easy, but none feel as alive as those Polaroids, crooked, imperfect, and overflowing with heart. Each one was a moment that said, "We were here. We were happy." Pokeweed greens offered one of the first fresh tastes of spring for people living with few supplies after a long winter. Young pokeweed shoots emerged early and plentifully, but they carried natural toxins that required careful boiling in several changes of water. Enslaved cooks, drawing on African knowledge of wild plants, mastered this technique to create a tender, spinach-like dish that supplied vital vitamins when gardens were only beginning to grow. Seasoned with a bit of salt pork or a sprinkle of wild herbs, poke greens became a welcome sign of the changing season. Long after emancipation, poke salad festivals in Appalachia and the Deep South celebrated this once humble plant, turning a survival ingredient into a community tradition. The careful preparation taught by generations of African-American cooks is still followed today, preserving both safety and flavor. Pokeweed greens remind us that deep botanical knowledge and patient cooking transformed a potentially dangerous weed into nourishing food that helped sustain families through the hardest times. Fried catfish brought a festive spirit to fundraisers and church picnics across the Deep South, drawing crowds who came for fellowship as well as for the crisp, golden fish. Freshly caught catfish fillets were dredged in seasoned cornmeal and quickly fried in bubbling oil until the crust turned crunchy and the flesh remained tender and flaky. Volunteers cooked outdoors in large iron pots, their laughter mingling with the sound of sizzling oil and the distant hum of gospel songs. Serving plates of fried catfish helped raise money for bus trips to marches and for families supporting activists away from home. Children waited eagerly for their share, enjoying the mild, sweet flavor brightened with a squeeze of lemon. The dish represented abundance drawn from local rivers and the generosity of neighbors who gave their time and skill to the cause. Goober pea cakes turned the peanut, long dismissed as poor man's food, into something hearty enough to take the place of meat. Families ground peanuts into meal, mixing them with cornmeal, eggs, and drippings if they had them, then frying the mixture into patties. The cakes were dense and filling, offering protein when meat was impossible to buy. Children learned to love them, sometimes adding syrup for sweetness or mustard for tang. Farmers grew peanuts in poor soil, making them dependable for families struggling with limited land. Goober pea cakes appeared at suppers across the South, their nutty flavor tied to both necessity and pride. They were not fancy, but they sustained households through days of labor and hardship. Over the years, they vanished as prosperity grew and meat became more accessible. Yet they remain a powerful reminder of resourcefulness, proof that what was once dismissed as humble could be transformed into a meal that carried families through the Jim Crow years. Coconut layer cake was a showstopper long before anyone used that word. Its tall, snowy layers stood like a monument to patience, pride, and the power of homemade sweetness. For many African American families, coconuts were a luxury ingredient, something rare, saved for the holidays when every effort went toward making the day special. Women grated fresh coconut by hand, scraping until their fingers were raw just to create that perfect flurry of white. The boiled icing shimmered like frost, and when it covered the cake, it looked like winter itself had arrived inside the kitchen. It wasn't just dessert, it was art, and it symbolized love poured into every step. When the knife sliced through the layers, it revealed soft yellow sponge, tender and rich from farm eggs and homemade butter. Coconut layer cake was the centerpiece of Christmas tables across the South, reminding everyone that joy could still rise high, even when life tried to flatten you. Handmade paper ornaments turned kitchen tables into craft stations filled with laughter and glue. When store decorations cost too much, families created beauty with what they had: old greeting cards, scraps of foil, and bits of ribbon saved from last year. Children traced angels, stars, and bells onto folded paper, cutting carefully under watchful eyes. Mothers strung popcorn garlands while fathers twisted wire hooks from hangers. The tree stood proudly, not perfect but personal, glowing with color and care. Every ornament told a story: a child's drawing, a reused bow, a name scrawled in crayon. The act of making them brought everyone together, a ritual that felt sacred in its simplicity. Even the smallest scraps became treasure under the soft light of the living room lamp. When the tree was finished, it shimmered with heart, each handmade piece a quiet reflection of joy made by hand. Today, store-bought ornaments gleam brighter, but none carry the warmth of paper and imagination shared between generations. Handmade decorations were proof that Christmas didn't come from a store. It was made right there, with scissors, glue, and love that never needed wrapping. Roasted chestnuts carried warmth and nourishment through the cold months when plantation rations were meager and gardens lay dormant. Enslaved families foraged chestnut trees that grew wild in the surrounding woods, gathering the smooth brown nuts and roasting them in hearth ashes or iron skillets until their shells cracked and the sweet flesh softened. The nuts' high energy content and natural sweetness made it an important source of calories and comfort, especially during long winter evenings. Roasted chestnuts became part of a wider African American food tradition, appearing in holiday celebrations and roadside markets after emancipation. Their gentle flavor paired well with cornmeal breads and simple stews, and many families passed down techniques for roasting and storing them long after the plantation era ended. Today, roasted chestnuts sold at winter festivals and city street corners carry echoes of that history, reminding us that what began as a survival practice also nurtured community and seasonal ritual for generations who transformed hardship into enduring culture. Buttermilk biscuits brought flaky, tender warmth to countless mornings when organizers prepared for marches or long trips to rallies across the South. Grandmothers and church cooks cut cold butter into flour and baking powder, folding the dough gently to create delicate layers that rose high in the oven. The biscuits emerged golden and fragrant, ready to be split and filled with country ham, drizzled with honey, or enjoyed plain with strong coffee. Their quick baking time made them perfect for feeding groups of volunteers before dawn departures, while their simple ingredients kept costs low. Children loved them with homemade jam, and adults relied on their steady comfort when days promised uncertainty and challenge. Buttermilk biscuits symbolized hospitality and steadfastness, offering a taste of home to those traveling for justice. Each warm bite reminded everyone that strength begins with nourishment, and that even the smallest gesture of care can sustain courage in the face of adversity. These biscuits remain a lasting emblem of Southern generosity and the quiet power of shared food. Cane syrup pone was a dense cornmeal cake baked with the thick sweetness of local syrup, a dish that blended necessity with a hint of indulgence. Families relied on cornmeal daily, but adding syrup transformed it into something closer to dessert. Housewives baked pone in cast-iron skillets, cutting wedges to serve alongside beans, greens, or milk. Children loved it for its sticky sweetness, one of the few treats they could count on. Cane syrup was cheaper than refined sugar and locally produced, making it an accessible luxury. The cake was filling, traveling well for long workdays in the fields. Cane syrup pone became tied to Southern tradition, remembered fondly as a comfort that sweetened otherwise harsh circumstances. Though rarely baked today, it was once a cherished dish that brightened tables during the Jim Crow years. It stood as a reminder that survival did not always mean denying joy. Sometimes it meant finding sweetness in the simplest of foods that kept hope alive. Chess pie was the kind of dessert that could silence a noisy room with one bite. Rich, buttery, and golden, it was simple yet decadent, relying on nothing more than eggs, sugar, butter, and a touch of cornmeal. This pie was a quiet triumph of Southern black kitchens, where economy met elegance. The filling puffed gently as it baked, setting into a custard that shimmered when sliced. Served warm or chilled, it was proof that flavor didn't need extravagance, it needed care. Chess pie always appeared at Christmas, often on the table beside sweet potato pie or coconut cake. It was for guests, yes, but also for the family who worked hard all year and deserved something that tasted like reward. The crust was flaky, made from scratch, the kind that broke under a fork but never under pressure. And when that buttery custard touched your tongue, it felt like coming home. Chess pie didn't try to impress. It didn't need to. It already knew it was perfect. Vinyl record gatherings were the soundtrack of Christmas joy, binding families together through rhythm and memory. Turntables sat beside twinkling trees, spinning tunes that seemed to warm the room as much as the fireplace did. The Jackson 5, Mahalia Jackson, and Stevie Wonder filled every corner with harmony, soul, and faith. Each pop and crackle of the record felt alive, proof that music didn't need perfection to move hearts. Parents reminisced about concerts they once attended, children clapped to beats they didn't yet understand, and elders hummed softly, smiling at melodies that carried them back decades. Someone always paused mid-song to say, "Now this one right here, this was the song." And everyone agreed. Between verses, laughter spilled into conversation, and memories unfolded like lyrics themselves. Record sleeves became artifacts of joy, their worn edges holding fingerprints of countless holidays past. Long after the final note faded, silence felt full, like love had left an echo that refused to die. Bay leaf infusion offered warmth and gentle comfort, using one of the few aromatic plants that grew wild near plantation quarters. Fresh or dried bay leaves were gathered from native bay trees and steeped in hot water to create a soothing tea with a light floral scent and mild medicinal qualities. This infusion was believed to aid digestion and ease colds, and it provided a calming moment during hard days. The knowledge of bay's healing properties came from both African herbal traditions and local indigenous practices, merging into a shared understanding of the land's quiet gifts. Even after emancipation, African American communities continued to brew bay tea for health and hospitality, and its subtle fragrance remains a hallmark of Southern kitchens where bay leaves still flavor soups and stews. Bay leaf infusion stands as a gentle reminder that survival was not only about calories but also about care, showing how enslaved people drew strength and solace from the natural world around them. Hoppin John carried a message of hope and tradition into the civil rights era, linking contemporary struggle with centuries of African American heritage. Black-eyed peas simmered with onions, rice, and smoky bacon or ham created a dish long associated with good fortune and the promise of prosperity in the year ahead. Activists and church members prepared large pots for New Year gatherings, believing that eating Hoppin John would invite blessings for the work to come. The savory aroma and hearty texture comforted those who faced uncertain days and reminded them of ancestors who persevered through hardship. Families passed down recipes that varied from household to household, but always carried the same wish for luck and strength. Serving Hoppin John at planning meetings or holiday celebrations tied the ongoing movement to a deeper history of resilience and faith. Each spoonful represented both nourishment and a quiet prayer that justice and equality would take firmer root in the seasons that followed. Wild persimmon leather served as a natural energy bar long before packaged snacks existed. Fully ripe wild persimmons, soft and honey-sweet, were mashed into a smooth pulp and spread thinly on clean boards or large leaves. Left in the sun to dry or placed near the gentle heat of a hearth, the mixture became a chewy sheet that kept for weeks. This portable treat provided a quick source of calories for long days in the fields and could be tucked into cloth packets for later use. The technique echoed African and indigenous methods of drying fruit to preserve it for travel and winter storage. After emancipation, many rural families continued to make persimmon leather as an autumn tradition, and some Appalachian homesteads still practice it today. Its deep caramel flavor and long shelf life show how ingenuity and patience created foods that were both practical and delicious. Wild persimmon leather stands as a vivid link between past and present, proving that simple preservation can yield enduring taste and nourishment. Which of these Christmas dishes would you bring back? Share your favorite below, and if it stirred a bit of home in you, like and subscribe to keep these flavors alive.